good lessons, but they're almost impossible to cover this material in an hour. But again, if you don't have your book, they're up here on the front row. Oh, I was going to tell you what we're going to be studying next. I forgot. Some of you already enjoy this. We're going to talk about work and rest. If you work, you're supposed to rest every once in a while. Then we're going through the letters to the Galatians. And then we're going to have Bible lessons from the animal kingdom. That ought to be a lot. That ought to be fun.
My next rest is going to be on your birthday in 23rd.
Oh. Well, you can take me out to lunch for my birthday. If I'm still here. The Lord leaves me here that much longer. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I never thought I'd be here to be this age and to see some of the things that we've seen take place. Life is interesting, real interesting. We're going to be talking today about Daniel in the lion's den. When faithfulness to God is challenged, we must remain steadfast. Now, none of us are going to ever face, at least I don't think we will, none of us is ever going to have to face what Daniel faced. And yet Daniel, this sounds loud. Daniel was true and faithful to the God that he served. Now, when I read this, I can remember at least one time, I think it was several, but at least one time I was getting in the car to go to work. And when I got into the car, I said, well, come on, God, you just will get on in here because I feel like Daniel going into the lion's den, and I'm not going without you. That's what kind of mindset I had that particular morning. But the Lord is always there. We may not always see, we may not always feel, we may not understand, but God is there. God is there even when you're somewhere you ought not to be. Because if he wasn't, you wouldn't feel guilty about going there. You know, there's some people who say, you know, I went so-and-so and such the other night, and I had an absolutely miserable time, and I thought, well, somebody's probably praying for you somewhere. That's all I could come up with, because there's some places I hadn't never had a whole lot of interest in going, but that's neither here nor there. The 6th chapter of Daniel describes an event that encapsulates Daniel's calling and experiences through the first 6 chapters. We've been kind of studying about Daniel for a while now. In it, we see Daniel holding to an humble faith, even as God blessed him in dramatic ways. Here we find Daniel to be the focus of an evil conspiracy that turned his faithfulness into a reason for persecution. Yet the prophet refused to compromise even when threatened with death. In the end, God delivered Daniel, and a pagan leader exalted Daniel's God. In a way, Daniel is a model for us in our own lives today. God calls us to humble faithfulness through which we testify to an unbelieving world that the God we serve is the one true God, mighty to serve. You know, it's amazing to me in this modern day and age when everything is so readily available that there are people who still do not believe that there is a God in heaven that sits on his throne. And I get really tickled when people don't want to believe that God created the heaven, God created the earth. And if you can believe that somehow a couple of little rocks somewhere floating around in the atmosphere, or whatever you would call it, accidentally bumped together and formed the earth, you're dumber than dirt. There's no other way to put it. You're just dumber than dirt if you believe that 2 rocks bumped together and said, oh, that felt good. So let's go bump into 2 more. And after you got so many rocks that bumped together, you got the earth. Have you ever actually looked at the earth? Have you ever actually looked at your surroundings? Since it has rained, thank you, God, and if you want to send some more, I'll be happy. But if you look at outside now since it's rained, and everything is so green, it's the brightest green you've ever seen. Of course, having cataract surgery helped that too. But everything is so pretty. The sky has never seemed to be bluer than it is now. Sitting out on the porch the other day, just about dusk, and Scotty was out there talking, and he said, well, look at that, look yonder. And here come 2 deer out of the little wooded area in front of the house, walked over and kind of looked around. One of them kind of hung back a little bit, finally got out of the bushes. And then they just literally walked down the road, headed towards Annette's. I meant to call Annette and see if she saw them, but it was beautiful. Just beautiful, the things that God creates. And then people don't want to believe that God is out there. But if we remain faithful to God, then God is faithful to us. That makes me, I can almost hear J.W. Strickland say those words. You know, faithfulness, faithfulness, faithfulness. If you're doing a lesson outline, it starts out with the first part is a conspiracy against Daniel. That's Daniel 6, 1 through 9. Daniel is above reproach. Wouldn't it be wonderful if people said that about us? That we are above reproach. I got a long way to go. Evil men set Daniel up. And then the second part would be Daniel's faithfulness invites a challenge. Daniel 6, 8 through 18. Daniel refuses to compromise. And then Daniel enters the lion's den. Then the third part is God delivered and is revered. Daniel 6, 19 through 28. God protects Daniel, and then Darius recognizes the true God. Daniel 6 and 10 says, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber towards Jerusalem, he knelt down upon his knees 3 times a day, and he prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. This was not something that Daniel did to rebel against the king's law. This is his everyday practice. His everyday practice was to pray 3 times a day, kneeling in the general direction of Jerusalem from where he was. But it was he practiced it, and just because somebody signed something that said you can't pray anymore didn't mean he was going to stop. You know, sometimes I look at the government and I think, well, I wonder when they're going to tell us we can't pray anymore. And what are we going to do? How faithful are we? I remember way back in the old church, what is now the old church, since that little church ain't there anymore. The old church, they had, I think it was the young people, except I know Tony was in it, and Tony would have been out of the youth by then. They had a courtroom scene. And I think Jenny B was Jenny B the judge or the prosecuting attorney? I don't remember. But they had somebody on trial. And the effort was to see if there was enough evidence against that person to convince you that they were a Christian. Enough to convict them of being a Christian. It was an interesting little skit that they did. I don't know where they came up with the idea. I don't know if it was an original thing that Jenny B or somebody came up with, or if it was something they had read. But it was a really interesting little thing to watch them. But you stop and think sometimes if they were looking for enough evidence against us to convict us of being a Christian, is the evidence out there and easy to find. Now, I tell people all the time, I've managed not to serve on the jury, thank you, God, because I have the wrong attitude to serve on a jury. I am the prosecuting attorney's dream of a jury. As far as I'm concerned, if you got arrested, you're guilty. I had a little boy in prison one time to tell me, I said, son, what are you doing here? His little paperwork just didn't fit the bill. I said, what are you doing here? And he laughed. He said, well, nurse, I'll tell you. This time I'm innocent. He said, this time, and he stressed this time. He said, this time I didn't do anything. He said, but ma'am, to be honest with you, I've done so much they didn't catch me for. He said, they ought to put me under the jail and throw away the keys. He said, I figured this time I'd just plead guilty and come on up here because I've been guilty so many times, but this time I'm truthfully innocent. I thought, what a good attitude to have. I decided I've been guilty, they just didn't catch me. I don't ever remember walking up to my mother and say, Mama, I did so and so and such, and you didn't catch me. I probably need to go to Grandma's and get a switch so you can handle this because you missed one. Let me assure you, my mother didn't hardly ever miss one. I don't know how she managed. She knew exactly what you were doing before you ever did it. But we need to think about being humble and to be faithful and understand that God's unwavering plan inside of Daniel's story and Daniel in the lion's den, if he delivered Daniel from the lion's den, then he still can deliver us today from whatever we face. The rain really didn't help my allergies much. Faithfulness to God can bring trials as well as opportunities to trust God and declare his salvation to others. When we go through a trial, we shouldn't have poor, pitiful me attitude. We should look at that trial and think, what can I learn from this, and what can I help other people from what I'm going through? How can I line this up so that other people will learn from this mistake that I made? We need to commit to maintaining an humble faith in God amid the trial of life. whether those trials be from within or from without. You know, sometimes things outside of what we can control become our problem. But other times it's something from within that we could control, that we let get into our mind, and it plays around with our mind, and it saps our energy and it saps our desire to do stuff. And my way of putting it is you have to sit down and have a poor, pitiful me, little pity party. Just don't stay in that mood too long. But sometimes it's from within, things that we go through or things that our imaginations get away with us. I tell people all the time, you can walk a mile in my shoe and you'll be fine. But if you spend 30 minutes in my brain, you've got trouble. Because it don't work like anybody else did. I was trying to explain that to somebody one day. They were trying to give me some instruction and trying to tell me something, and I just kept looking at them. And they kept telling me over and over and over, and I finally said, I heard you the first time. You know, you didn't have to repeat it. I know what you said. But you got to understand that my brain don't work like yours. I got to do it my way. My way. I tell people all the time, I can't read directions. But I can look at a picture. I put a gas grill together looking at a picture. The instructions didn't make a bit of sense. I understand now why men won't read directions. And I can't name too many men that will actually read directions. I got around to reading the directions. What did I have the other day? And I thought, well, God, I've been doing this forever. I might ought to read the directions. And whatever it was, I sat down and read the directions. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I'd been doing it forever and had never read the directions. So I took the time to read them. There's a question in here, and we don't have time for everybody to say yay, nay, and talk about it, but have you ever been falsely accused of something? If so, did that false accusation have negative consequences for you? Did somebody say something about you that weren't true, or did they say something about you that was true, but you could take whatever they said and make a good lesson out of it for somebody else? Or maybe for you, maybe some of the mistakes you made in life, if you tell other people, they might not go through the same thing. It's kind of like if you out driving a car. Where was I? I was reading something that was talking about people that were in cars and they got caught in flash floods. I don't remember where it was, and they couldn't get out of the cars. Well, if there's a sign up that says, don't go down this road because the water's deep, obviously somebody's been down that road and they already know the water's deep and your car won't fit. Now, I can tell you my car sits on the ground. That's a one low sitting car. I don't ride through water. No, I just don't do that. Of course, if it's raining too hard, I'm not usually outside. I'm in the house. But anyway, here in this lesson, we're going to see Daniel take a firm stand in the Lord being challenged. Why such a challenge may have been a recurring theme in this unit, which we have done. Today, we're going to explore an added dimension of injustice. Because Daniel was accused of something that he did not do, but at the same time, he was doing exactly what they accused him of, but the motivation was different. For a multitude of reasons, our faith can cause others to treat us badly and place us in difficult situations. In those moments, we can rely upon God to care for us and walk with us through the hard times, no matter where he might lead. You don't walk through hard times that God don't go with you. You may have walked through some hard times when you didn't recognize that the Lord was there until you got to the finish line, I'll say, until you came through whatever the issue was, you came through, and then you look back and you saw that it was God. You know, I tell people all the time, you come down here at this church and you can see walking miracles everywhere. You know, walking miracles. Sitting in that corner, sitting over here. There's people come in, you can look over here. When Judy gets here, I look at her and I think, Lord, all the miracles that you can see, and some stuff I don't know anything about that people have been through. But some things I know enough about to know if it hadn't been for God, you wouldn't be here today. But you're here because the mercies of God is everlasting. We're going to start out with a conspiracy against Daniel. Daniel is above reproach, and this is Daniel 6, 1 through 5. Some of this is in the book, some of it's not, and I'm going to read as fast as I can read. Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high ruler official to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because Daniel Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in a way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. This is the New Living Testament, by the way. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. Now, wouldn't it be nice if somebody said the only way you're going to be able to find the fault with them is to go check what they say they believe and see whether or not they're doing what they say they believe? They tried to say that he wasn't, and I'm going to make up a scenario to go with this. They were trying to say he wasn't handling the money right. He wasn't handling the official stuff. He was breaking the rules over here, or he was doing this, or he was doing that, but they couldn't find any fault in him. And one of the reasons they were jealous is because, remember, Daniel was brought into this country. When brain just cut off, when Israel was defeated in a battle, he was brought into this country, and look at where he is. He has been elevated to where he's actually over the high officials in that government, for lack of a better word. I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't have another one right now. Darius the Mede is the leader of a new Medo-Persian government in Babylon. You remember way back with the statue and all that. You remember where this was prophesied and came in. Darius may have been a kind of governor over Babylon under King Cyrus, who ruled the vast Persian Empire. It is also possible that the name Darius was an alternate designation used for Cyrus himself. Darius had set up 120 satraps, which basically are officials, who were lower officials ruling over smaller territories, and appointed three administrators to manage those satraps. Daniel was one of those administrators that were placed over the officials of the government. Daniel quickly distinguished himself from other administrators. God had blessed Daniel from the beginning of his time in Babylon, and he was known for having the ability to communicate with the divine. Remember, he is the one who remembered the king's dream to start with. Not only did he interpret the dream, but he remembered the dream and could tell Nebuchadnezzar what he dreamed. And then he was there when the writing on the wall. Now, I dare say if all of a sudden a hand appeared from out of nowhere and started writing on the walls, we'd all leave. I don't know whether we would sit here and wait on somebody to come interpret that or not, but I think it would scare us. But he went in and he could read what was on the wall and tell the king what it meant, and told the king, actually, the words were, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Basically, his life had been scrutinized, and he was not living like he should have been living, and God was giving him a message that basically you're going to die. And he did. He did, I think, that night. But anyway, he had quickly distinguished himself. The reason for these people coming in trying to find so much fault with him was simply jealousy. They were jealous of what he had done. Their jealousy led them to search for a point in Daniel's life that they could report back to the king and find out and make the king think that Daniel was not being faithful to the king. To their disappointment, Daniel was found to be faithful and extremely competent with no hint of corruption. Can you imagine a politician with no hint of corruption? I'm not saying they're all corrupt, but no matter what they do, somebody's going to find fault with them. You know, there's several out there that I can find all kind of fault with, that I don't know enough about them, but I just don't like them. You know, it's just something about them I don't like. I don't like to hear them talk sometimes. But anyway, Daniel's rivals sought to exploit him by way of his religion. This is the one thing they knew they could get him on, knowing him to be a faithful worshiper of the God of the Hebrews and no other. They planned to ensnare Daniel by forcing him to violate his commitment to God. First, let me back up a little bit. At this point in the story, two observations are worth noting. One, Daniel did not hide his faith in God. He did not hide to do what he was doing. He prayed 3 times a day, and he didn't care who saw him. He didn't go in the closet. Nowadays, we talk about our prayer closet. I can't get in the closet. I get too hot. I've tried that. I tried to set me up a little prayer room in my closet, and it didn't last long because I got in there and the sweat just poured, and I couldn't think about praying because I was thinking about being too hot. I tried putting a fan in there. That didn't help. I was still too hot. I had to get back out, and I couldn't pray in the closet. But he didn't hide in the closet. He didn't hide his faith in God. He was known as somebody who would not compromise his faith. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing if that's what people said about us? whatever they do or do not do, they will not compromise their faith in God. Most of us sitting in here are old enough to have had some experiences in life in which we can see exactly where God stepped in, exactly when God was there to bring us through a difficult time that we wouldn't have been able to get through without him. These evil men sought to set Daniel up. This is Daniel 6 through 9, 6. So the administrators and the high officers went to the king, and he said, "Long live King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, and high officers, and advisors, and governors, that the king should make it a law that should be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed. An official law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be revoked." So King Darius signed the law. Now here you got 2 or 3 issues. One, Darius evidently had a very big inflated ego. He had a real high opinion of himself if he thought people should worship him. Can you imagine somebody making a decree that for the next 30 days you can't worship God, you've got to worship that man? You know, I don't even want to go there. I'm going to stay in the book. Daniel 6 and 7 records that these evil officials became conspirators. They got together and planned ahead of time what they were going to do because they knew that Daniel was faithful to God, and they knew ahead of time that Daniel would not worship the king. They appeared as a group before the king, and they were trying to act like, oh, we just came up with this on the spur of the moment. They had planned it. They had worked on it. They made sure because they knew Daniel's habits. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody knew that you prayed every morning at 9 o'clock, that you had a 30-minute session with God? Then at 1 o'clock, you had another 30-minute session with God. And then, for the sake of some of us who don't stay awake late at night anymore, somewhere about 9 o'clock at night, you had another 30 minutes with God. Now, that 30 minutes may run over into an hour if you get down to business with God, but you have such a routine that people who know you and know you well know not to call you at 9 o'clock in the morning because you're in prayer. They know not to ring the doorbell at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because you're praying. They know not to call you at 9 o'clock. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Not to call you at 9 o'clock because you are on your knees before an almighty God praying. Well, I don't know what time Daniel prayed, but it is established that he prayed 3 times a day, kneeling before God, facing basically Jerusalem. Lost my place on that one. But here they came up with this odd proposal. Now, why would anybody come up with the idea and say, "King, why don't you make it a law that nobody can worship any god but you?" Trying to elevate this man up on the level of any god, but certainly not the God. "Whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save you, O king," that's verse 7. "Anybody who prays," is what it says in the NIV, "is a reference to pagan priests who would meditate their prayers to God, not just to the God. They prayed to false gods. They didn't pray to God. They prayed to false gods, and it was in their habit." This proposal included a decree that prayers could only be offered through Darius. You had to go to him with your prayer and with your petition. This was not a suggestion that Darius set up himself as a god, but that Darius would be the sole priest in Babylon for the next 30 days. You can't pray unless you go to Darius and get Darius to help you with your prayers or to give you permission to pray, or he's going to intercede between you and whatever God you're praying to. Only Darius could do that. Well, that would make me think nobody in that kingdom prayed. If you had 50,000, which would be small, if you had 50,000 people in a kingdom that couldn't pray to any god unless they came to you, you sure wouldn't get nothing done. They wouldn't have much of a prayer life because they'd spend all the time traveling back and forth. But nobody could pray to any god except through Darius. Now, there's some places where it says you were supposed to fall down and worship Darius. The rationale between this decree was likely it created a situation in which these newly conquered Babylon subjects would demonstrate their full loyalty to Persia, thereby contributing to the unity of the kingdom. You got to remember, back in those days, when you went to war, when you went to battle with people and you conquered that nation, you brought people from that nation into your own. And when they came into your nation, they were expected to assimilate into your nation, your habits, your customs, and what you deem not holding on to their own life from back there. A horrific and gruesome fate would await anybody who defiled this decree. Such a rebel would be torn to pieces by lions. In fact, the Persians were known for extreme forms of persecution, execution, and historical records indicate that they kept lions in cages for this purpose. That sounds bad. That's just mean. The officials insisted that Darius have a decree put into writing and declare it so that it could not be repealed, probably to ensure that it was officially enacted before he realized the plot. If you hurry along and get the king to sign this piece of paper, he doesn't have time to think about it. You know, my children used to like for me to work the third shift and be sleeping because they can knock on the door. Mama, can we walk across Highway 74? They didn't say it in these words. Can we walk across Highway 74 and go to Walmart? Yes, go on. Just get out of here and let me sleep. Knowing that they weren't supposed to walk across Highway 74 and go to Walmart. They knew better. Yeah. Or, Mama, can we go so-and-so and such with so-and-so? Yeah, go on. Because it was always yeah. And they told me that one day, Mama, if you're sleeping, everything's always yes. And I thought, okay, now we're catching up to stuff. But they would go places, do things, and they knew that if I was awake and knew what they actually said, the answer would have been no. But that's what they did here. They got him to sign it into law before he had time to think about what he was doing, because if he'd have thought about it, he would have known exactly what they were trying to do. And what they were trying to do was entrap Daniel into this situation. Daniel, and parts that we just read, presents a situation that many of us have observed in our own experiences, whether at work, among friends, or even more sadly in families or in the church. People act out of jealousy or personal ambition to undermine somebody else. That's really bad when that's what you have to do. Take a moment to examine your own life. Are you engaging in such activities? How can you make it right? And what is the best way to respond when you receive such treatment? The best way to respond to any kind of mistreatment is to go to God in prayer. There's no point in making an issue out of it. I've had people walk by me and say, you sure are not friendly. And I thought, no, I'm not. There's not very many Dixons that are. If they are, they get it from the other side of the family. We're just not friendly people. But they'll say, you're not very friendly. I saw you so-and-so and such, and you didn't even wave. And I think, I don't even see people. If my mind is on something else, I just go right on by, and sometimes I don't hardly even know where I am because I'm trying to figure out something in this little pea-sized brain up here I got that I keep telling people, don't work like yours. My mind has a mind of its own. So don't get your feelings hurt so easily. Don't overreact when you think somebody's done something to you. I remember go back over that church again, and it was Sister Cook came and she talked one Sunday morning, or I think it was on Sunday morning on Mission Sunday, but I might be wrong there. But somebody was talking to her after church, and y'all don't know Sister Cook. She was an older lady from over at Rockingham. But she made the statement, oh, when I go so-and-so and such, she said, I don't let anybody hurt my feelings. She said, I just take my feelings and I just knock them off, and I tuck them under my dress, and I get everything where it ought to be before I go in. So she went in her own way. She was armed and dangerous because she had already been to the Lord. In my interpretation of what she's saying, she'd already been to the Lord and they'd already talked about it. And she said, I just don't allow these things to happen because I don't open myself up for that. I'm not overly sensitive. I don't pay people any attention. And I think, Lord, if we could all be that way. But unfortunately, we usually pay a lot of attention to people, and we sometimes jump to conclusions about what they do or do not do. Daniel refuses to compromise. Daniel 6:10-15 says, but when Daniel heard that the new law had been signed, he went home and he knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, and his windows were open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about this law. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into a lion's den? Yes, the king said, that decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and the Persians, and it cannot be revoked. They then told the king, well, that man Daniel, that man, that person that you brought over here and set in such high authority over us, you put him in this place. Well, that man, Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. Hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. But in the evening, the men went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. Daniel's response to Darius is a powerful example of uncompromising faith. There are 2 points here that we need to look at. First, Daniel had a regular practice 3 times daily in which he opened the window of his residence, which faced Jerusalem, and offered a prayer of thanksgiving to God. He went to God and he began his prayer to the Lord with thanking God for what he had already done. That is something we should get into the habit of doing. Our prayer should open with thank you, God, for what you have already done. Because there's nobody sitting in here right now, I'm pretty sure, that's going hungry. If you are, come to the food pantry on Thursdays and we'll feed you. Or we'll give you food. We're not going to feed you. We're not going hungry. Some of us could do with a little less. But we're not going hungry. There's nobody in here, probably, that didn't sleep in a nice air condition, or even if you didn't have an air conditioner, you opened the windows and plugged in the fan. Now, if you were in, not that you're invited, but if you were in my room at my house, the air conditioner's running, the ceiling fan's running, little oscillating fan over here on my side of the bed. There's one on the stand over here on the other side of the bed. If it's real hot, I got another fan over there in the corner. Because I get hot. And I have all these little gizmos, so I don't get hot at night, and I still wake up sweating. But we live in more comfort than probably any nation in the world. And people that says this country, they don't want to be in this country, pack up and leave. Pack up and leave. You won't get far before you be ready to come back. Because no matter what you say, and no matter how many faults we got, it's the best country in the world. If it wasn't, there wouldn't be so many people trying to get in here. But we should thank God. We should start our prayer life with thanks, praise, and thanksgiving to an almighty God who takes such good care of us. We're all fed. We slept in a room last night. The roof's not leaking. That old song, my roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. We don't have holes in the roof. We all slept well. I did go outside last night. I guess I ought to pray about this after a while, but I haven't got there yet. All the noise that was being made in the neighborhood last night with the little four-wheelers and the little whatever else them little things are. And then I heard somebody talking, and it sounded like they were in my front yard. They were so loud. And I walked out on the front porch, and over in the woods I could hear, and I walked out just in time to hear them say something that they didn't need to be saying. But they were over there, yap, 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 and it was so loud I couldn't think, and I walked out to the door, and I said, go home and go to bed. I'm surprised you didn't hear me at your house, because I was just bent out of shape. Go home. I got to get up and go to church in the morning. You go home, go to bed, and get up and go to church in the morning. Go home. Oh, this was people talking. Go home. Go home. Go make noise at your house. I have enough noise at my house. I have enough noise in my head. But Daniel had a regular practice. 3 times a day he opened up the windows and he started his prayer with thanksgiving. Lord, thank you for what you've already done. Lord, help me not to be one of these people who always wants more and more and more, but never takes the time to thank you, God, for what you've done. First and foremost, Lord, I thank you that you saw fit to save my soul. That song that people used to sing, he left the 99. If you've got 100 sheep and one disappears, it don't make no sense that you leave the others and go hunt that one that's lost. Except for the fact that that 99 is enclosed. That 99 is already found and already been taken care of. But that one little lost lamb, if you're a shepherd, you go looking for that one little lost lamb. And there used to be all kind of songs. I don't know why we can't sing these old songs, but there used to be an old song that talked about he left the 99 to go find that one. If you're that one, that's a big deal. That is a big deal if you're that one. Now, I don't know anybody with sheep, but I was talking to somebody that rescued a dog the other day, that some heartless person put 2 dogs out by the road and left them. Beautiful little puppy. The owner had died, and this is the way the person who, anyway, that's neither here nor there. But she made the statement. I said, oh, it's a beautiful dog. How would anybody throw that dog out? And she said, it might be beautiful. And the little dog was just as quiet and happy as, but I said, let me walk out this room. And she'll yelp. So I can't go anywhere without that dog on my face. I thought, well, my Lord, you picked her up off the side of the road, out of the heat. You brought her home to an air-conditioned room. You gave her a bed to sleep in, and you fed her. You know, that's a lot. So that little puppy right now is my illustration of a lamb. When you go out of your way to go rescue that one, when Jesus went out of his way to rescue that one, if you were that one that he rescued, then that's where you need to start your prayer. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord. Jesus didn't have to die. Unless I read the Bible wrong, he could have called 10,000 angels. He could have looked at God and said, I'm sorry, Father, these people just ain't worth all this. But he stayed on the cross, and he stayed on the cross for us, for you, for me, for other individuals. But he had that as his practice. To me, he started his day. His 3 prayers that were directed towards Jerusalem followed and even exceeded the instructions that were found in the Bible in Psalms 55 and 17 and 1 Kings 8 and 35, if you want to look that up. Second, Daniel continued this regular practice despite the knowledge of the decree. He knew what had been signed into law. He did not increase his visibility nor frequency in prayer to draw any attention. He didn't change what was already his habit. It was already an established habit that he was going to pray 3 times a day. He got down on his knees before God, and he prayed, and he didn't try to hide it. He didn't make a big production out of it. It's what he had always done, and it says he simply continued to practice his faith as he had been doing. Meanwhile, these conspirators spied on Daniel, then reported to Darius. You know, they were watching him because they wanted to catch him in a fault. And the only fault they had already determined, the only fault they were going to be able to find was between him and what he did with his God. They knew his habit, and they knew his habit was to pray, and they had enough confidence in Daniel, which is kind of funny when you consider all things. They had enough confidence to believe that he would not change that. They knew he would not stop praying and worshiping his God. So that's what he did, and they went and told on him, little tattletales. They went and told him. It says, know that they put Daniel in as bad a light as possible. They tried to make it sound like more than it was. Daniel was not one of them, but he was one of those children of captivity. And they claimed Daniel was disrespectful to Darius himself, not just to his decree. Darius was not happy about this turn of events. It wasn't that he was unhappy that Daniel was praying. He was unhappy that Daniel had gotten called and that he had been tricked into signing a decree that he would put to death anybody that was found worshiping God, another God. He recognized that the decree now was not an attempt to honor him, but it was envy-driven conspiracy designated or designed to eliminate a rival. Clearly, Darius liked Daniel, for he was determined to find a way out of having to execute him. However, as Daniel's jealous rivals joined in, Darius had made a binding order based on the authority of the Persian government. It could not be revoked. Daniel would have to face the lions then. Now, in our minds, well, my mind won't go there. I can't go in the lion's den, not a physical lion's den. My mind can go to what becomes my lion's den sometime, but I can't imagine being thrown into a cave with no easy way out, and there's lions in there that have been kept in a cage, and you're going to set them out so they'll tear me from limb to limb, as people would say. He goes into the lion's den, and this is found in Daniel 6, 16 through 18, and it says, so at last the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to him, may your God, whom you serve faithfully, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles so that no one could rescue Daniel. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment, and he couldn't sleep at all that night. Here he is. He signed the decree, but what is he doing? Fasting. I guess he's praying to his God. I don't know. But he was fasting for Daniel to somehow survive the night in the lion's den, because he did not want Daniel to die. So even as Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, Darius further revealed his compassion and concern for Daniel. He asked the question, thy God, or he made the statement, thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver you. Even a pagan king believed that God would deliver Daniel. Daniel had obviously gained the respect of the Persian officials, just as he had the Babylonian officials before them. God's favor had continued to rest upon Daniel, and the reputation of Daniel's God as one who saves and performs miracles had endured. Daniel found himself hopelessly trapped in a lion's den. No matter that he didn't do anything wrong, no matter that he was living for the Lord, no matter that his life was probably as close to perfect as most people would have been back there, no matter what the issue, he still faced the lion's den. He still was put through the possibility of being tormented and torn apart. But it says that lost my place. No person would ever dare to break the seal of the king that the king put on. I don't know if I read it in here, if I read it in something else that I looked up. But it has soft clay around it because they were going to imprint their signia with their rings, Darius as well as the other officials, showing that they had put him there. The stone was around it, and then they all sealed it, saying so nobody could get in. It says, no person would dare break the king's seal. There was no possibility of escape or rescue for Daniel. With Daniel secured in the den, the king returned to the palace for the evening. It said, yet he was clearly troubled. Verse 18, he could not sleep and was not interested in diversion of any kind of entertainment. He even refused to eat. Clearly, Darius held Daniel in high regard, whether because of his skills or his charisma or his faith. Perhaps Darius regarded this because of all three. Maybe he admired Daniel's faithfulness to God. Maybe he admired the skills that he had. He was well liked. He was well liked by other people. God protects Daniel. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you served so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, long live the king. My God sent his angels to shut the lion's mouth so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. It says in here, according to the Bible, the king rose very early in the morning, and he made haste. He ran to the lion's den to see what had happened to Daniel. In the ancient world, it is often the case, as it is here, if a person punished with this kind of torture survived until morning, then he would be pardoned. If he survived the night, he would automatically be pardoned. Upon arriving at the lion's den, Darius' words are telling, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God. That God that you serve so faithfully and you serve continuously, is he or was he able to deliver you from the lions? Darius not only recognized the reality of Daniel's God, but he also wondered if Daniel's God had preserved him. This should not be taken that Darius became a believer in or followed God, since the ancients recognized the existence of many gods, but rather it showed respect that he had both for Daniel and for Daniel's faith. Oh, for people to have that kind of confidence in our faith and our relationship with God, that they believe that God will bring us through each situation. Daniel responded to the king's cry with the customary greeting that one would give a king a wish that he would live forever or have a long life. These words no doubt brought great joy to Darius. Then Daniel explained what had happened to him. God sent his angel to close the mouth of the lions. While some see this angel as part of an angelic host of heaven, many scholars see this passage that was recorded in Daniel. The angel was a divine being, and therefore probably a pre-incarnated appearance of Jesus Christ himself. Furthermore, this being was visible to Daniel, providing comfort and assurance in a terrifying situation. Daniel could see the angel. Daniel could see Christ. Daniel could see the being that God had sent to keep him safe. Most of us, if we're in situations, if we wake up in the middle of the night and open up and think we see something, it doesn't bring us comfort, it brings us fear. I did that not long ago. I had a bathrobe hanging on the back of my door going into the bedroom, and I wasn't really awake, and I opened my eyes, and that thing looked like a person standing there. For some reason, it didn't scare me. I just couldn't figure out how they got in the house. And it's usually pretty secure. But anyway, where I lost my place. Then Darius joyfully had Daniel removed from the den and examined, and despite the situation, not one wound could be found on him. It says in verse 23, it's clear about why, because he, Daniel, believed in his God. Be careful not to miss a key word in this verse. Daniel trusted his God. You got to go back. This is a pagan country, and they worship many gods. Daniel worshiped the God. So once again, circumstances in the book of Daniel cause the God of the Hebrews to be set against and contrasted with the pagan gods of Babylon and now Persia. And once again, the one-time God, the true God, is shown for who he really is. Almighty, sovereign, high above all powers, including the gods of the conquering nations. The next part of this is not in the book, and I'm going to just read it, and I'm going to hush with probably a whole lot of explanation. Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children. I don't know why they always include the wives. Along with their wives and children, the lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they hit the floor of the den. Then King Darius sent a message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. We're not going to go through that because basically it's just going back through what we had. I don't have time for my notes. But God rescues us. He is always there no matter what our situation. I don't guess there's anything today that we could compare to being put in the lion's den. But even in a den of lions, God was still faithful. He still rescued Daniel, and Daniel never failed to praise and thank God for what he had done. Any comments? Oh. But do what I did, go out on the porch and holler at him, tell him to go down house.